Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It really means a lot, I think, to all of us at Yay Bikes and our partners at Transit Columbus that you're taking some time on this beautiful Sunday afternoon to be here and talk about bikes, transit, walkability, mobility justice. And so I think if you're here in this room, you'll probably agree with all of us that we want a Columbus and a Central Ohio where it is safe, comfortable, and accessible for everyone, no matter what neighborhood they're in, what mode of transportation they use, to get where they need to go safely. And so we're here today, but I think it's been a very exciting time the last few years with a lot of big initiatives in the region that are advancing some things forward in a really positive direction. And so I think we want to meet here today and talk about how we can continue to further that and make sure that we hit those big dreams we all have and build it together. So we are going to start with this panel that I think is going to get us really grounded in some of the work that's been going on and hopefully dreaming big about what we could achieve together. And so without a whole lot of ado, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to just briefly introduce who's up here, and then we'll hopefully get into a great conversation. So I'm going to start down at this end here with my co-facilitator, Stevie. She is there with Transit Columbus and president of that board right now. So our partners, like I said, on the transit side in the work that Yay Bikes is doing. From there, Mike Andrako. He is a professional engineer with the Franklin County Engineers Office and the mobility engineer, so helping lead up all things, bike, transit, mobility there. Robbie Banks is Director of Community Impact with the Central Ohio Transit Authority, so obviously our partners running all of our transit buses, helping us get where we need to go. Our fabulous council member from Columbus City Council, Lourdes Barroso de Padilla, so she is chairing up the Public Services and Transportation Committee, so very key for some of those policy decisions that we are working toward. And then Brian Ashworth, who is a planner with the Columbus Department of Public Service and has been key and integral in a lot of the Bike Plus planning work that has happened. So with that, I'm going to jump right in, and maybe Stevie, you can kick us off here with our first question for our panel.
Yeah, of course. Thank you to all the panelists for being here and for lending your time today for some insight for the folks in this room and hopefully beyond. I'm going to start just from the top of why does mobility justice matter to you personally, and what role has walking, biking, or taking public transit played in your life? And I think we can start here and just go down.
Okay, yeah. For me, walking is huge, and I do like biking, but walking is my primary mode of transportation when I'm trying to get places. I pick the community I live in because it's very walkable, and I try to make other communities as walkable as mine. I at one point in my career, or my life, I guess, when I was I went to Ohio State and I lived in Clintonville, so I relied on the number 2 bus and took it every day. So I in the past have taken a lot of transit, but now, like I said, I bike a little bit, but I love to walk, and I walk as much as I can. So.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. Mobility justice to me means that we need to work on ensuring that it doesn't depend on your income, your physical ability, your zip code, and how you get around. For me personally, I grew up riding COTA, a family of 8, and we had 1 car. And so literally our transit was taking the COTA bus and walking. My mom is 85 and she still tries to ride the bus. She is able, but there's plenty of folks that literally shuttle her around everywhere. So was frankly just very dependent on transit and grateful that we had a reliable transit authority to get us from place to place throughout our lives. I also love to walk as well.
First, I want to say thank you to our partners at Yay Bikes and Transit Columbus for inviting me to be here today, and thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon. I see a lot of our friends, our advocates, folks who I think are also, great teachers, especially for me, I think, in this role. So similar to Robbie, my parents, so I'm the daughter of immigrants. My parents are from Cuba. I was born 6 years after they came to the States, and my mother has never driven a day in her life, or never drove a day in her life. She passed away recently. And, she took the bus to go to work. She took the bus to go to church. I was telling the story the other day about how my sister was my sisters were both more than 10 years older than me. So my sister had to take summer school at Central High School downtown, which is what COTA is today. That was Central High School. And my mom didn't want her to go downtown by herself. So me and my mom and my sister would pile on the bus. I joke around that I spent half of my childhood like this, running, because my mom walked incredibly fast for a very short Latina woman, and like pulled me along because we were always running from some bus to another bus or walking somewhere. And then, when I got older, my 10-speed was the way that I got anywhere. It's the way that I got to the pool. It's the way that I got to the rec center. It's the way I went to my friend's house, where my kids can FaceTime each other all the time now. We literally had FaceTime, and it was getting on the bike or getting on the bus to be together somewhere. And so, when I turned 16, basically I got a car because I think there was just a lot of stress on my dad being the only driver in our house, and my sisters were both gone. And so that's when we shared the responsibilities. But then I moved to the East Coast, where I gave up my car, and I lived in Boston, where I took public transit everywhere. And my husband, who grew up in Boston, still to this day bikes to work all the way from the East Side to OSU, and takes the bus. And so in my mind, until I got into the seat, I never thought anything different. I'm like, this is just not everyone's existence. I didn't come from that, right? This was only my existence, the only options that we had, the only choices that we had. And so, later as an adult, I was hit by a car when I was crossing the street with the light. A woman just wasn't paying attention and made a left turn into me. And so I think a lot of the issues that we talk about, a lot of the stories that I hear sitting in this seat when I'm working with our partners from public service to think about how we make our roadways safer, impacted me in ways that I just did not connect the dots, because I think you have a lived experience. And it's not until you share those experiences with other people and you start to connect it to policy, and you start to connect it to how we think and how we structure things, that it changes your perspective. And so I just want to ensure that everybody in Columbus has the opportunity to get to the prosperity that they need to get to, whether that's the doctor's office or school or work or whatever, and that they can get there safely, whether they're biking, they're rolling, or they're walking.
Plus, you recently bought a bike.
I did. No. I didn't get a bike. I didn't buy it. I got it for Mother's Day, an e-bike, which also requires a certain level of, I'm actually not really an adult, and I need to charge it more often is what I need to do. That's what I mean. I'm really an adult. I represent y'all well, I promise.
I'm Brian Ashworth. I work in public service, so professionally, it's important to me to provide mobility options for the people in this room and the people who are definitely not in this room, who don't think about transportation in their daily lives but depend on it. Whether they need to get to school or work or otherwise. I think 34% of our community doesn't have reliable access to a vehicle. So over a third of our population needs this room to be able to advocate for them, to build the infrastructure that we have to. So that's what I do professionally, is to help Councilmember Barroso Padilla as much as I physically and professionally can. Personally, I ride a ridiculous cargo bike and shepherd my children around to school, soccer practice, or wherever else they tell me they need to be.
It's very cool.
I know Mark also has one. I saw your Urban Arrow out there. And I am also a pretty avid runner, so I try and experience all streets within our city as much as I can, and not just stick to the Olentangy Trail. It's kind of goal, but I do have a goal to run every street in the city of Columbus. I am not very far. I think I'm 10%, and it is daunting. But yeah, what does it feel like to run on James Road is something that I have checked off the list. So that's why this work matters to me.
That's great. So I think two of the largest initiatives that I think go hand in glove together are LinkUS, which is a large transit project that had some funding recently, passed on the ballot with a levy last year, and then Bike Plus, which is a comprehensive bike planning and policy program. I'm sure there's some other initiatives, so I think maybe we could go through and talk to us a little bit about what you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges with these initiatives or others that maybe we aren't as familiar with. And a little bit about your confidence or concerns that you might have about how we deliver on those goals. And we can popcorn around if whoever wants to. Go first.
I'll go first. So related to LinkUS, the opportunity is huge. We're completely redesigning our mobility system and how we get around and provide access to opportunity, whether it's healthcare, education, entertainment, things that you want to do outside of schoolwork. Also play, that's super important, but without relying on a car. The challenge, I think, for us is just change. People maybe that have not had to rely on transit before, public transit, we hope that they consider trying it. Here in our region, we've obviously been very car reliant for decades. So change is a little, uncomfortable for people. I think that's our biggest challenge.
I'll share a little bit about Bike Plus. Some of the opportunities we have is I do think we as a city, I know it might not always feel like it, but we as a city are committed to providing more opportunities in this space. Bike Plus was an 18-month planning effort with people like Letizia Cettina and Emma Coggy. Yeah, thank you, Brian. And lots of people in this room who helped provide feedback to that. So I do appreciate all of the information and input that you gave us. I think some of the biggest opportunities we have now is that there is a plan in place that if and when a parcel develops, we can say, hey, that's actually on the Bike Plus network. You need to build something on that roadway in this place. It also, I'll let Mike talk about the TSI dollars. That's huge for our community, but having, he'll get to that. He'll get to what TSI is. But having a plan in place so that we know what we need to build and kind of in what order and why we need to do it, not only internally so that I can explain to my colleagues and the engineer brains that are around my office about why it's important, but how we can tell that story to electeds and to people who might not be thrilled that I'm putting a bike lane in front of their house, and having Councilmember Barroso de Padilla by our side to help share why that's important. That's what the opportunity of Bike Plus really is.
I'll go. The engineer brain, not in his office, but I would start with the problem. The problem is we know we have a lot of gaps in our pedestrian and bikeway infrastructure. Franklin County Engineer's Office maintains the areas outside of city jurisdiction, and we are typically the gaps, because in Columbus, during development, they're forced to build sidewalks, they're forced to build shared use paths. And outside of Columbus and outside of other jurisdictions, the developers weren't forced to do that historically. So now I have the daunting task of filling in all those gaps. And so the problem is funding pedestrian and bikeway infrastructure has historically been very difficult. There's programs like Safe Routes to School, there's programs like MORPC attributable funding. Those are both federally funded programs, so it takes many, many years to spend those dollars. And the pots aren't very big. For Safe Routes to Schools, you can only get $500,000 a year. That doesn't build much sidewalk or shared use path. For the attributable funds with MORPC, they have very limited amount that they can spend each or every other year on pedestrian bikeway infrastructure. So our problem has been, we know there's a need, we just don't have any money. And if you have identified a project and it doesn't have funding, it's not a project yet. Like we don't know when it's gonna happen or if it's gonna happen. So once it gets funding, we know exactly when it's gonna get built, and that's when it becomes real to us. And so we know there's a lot of projects out there, we just didn't have funding for them. When COTA came with issue 47, we were very excited. I said it'd be like Christmas every day if this thing passed. And then it did pass, and now we're like, oh shoot, we have to deliver on all these projects. And I have 8 new projects that are starting design in January. It's ridiculous. It's millions and millions of dollars of design money that are on real projects that are gonna get delivered very fast. So started with the problem, funding for pedestrian and bikeway infrastructure. Thankfully, LinkUS provided us a solution. 27.5% of the additional funding through the sales tax increase goes toward pedestrian and bikeway infrastructure, and it's through a program we call TSI, or Transit Supportive Infrastructure. That is funding this $53 million revenue source that's going to provide funding for shared use paths for the foreseeable future. Shared use paths, sidewalks, you can do bike lanes, you can do road diets, all that stuff is eligible under this funding source. So what it has done is it's provided us that funding source that we can spend quickly. It's state money, not federal. The federal government can't take that money away from us like they can through the federal government process. So I do have a couple federally funded road diets that, we could lose funding on those just because of the current situation. So the state funding, we can spend it faster. There's a lot of it, $50 million a year, and it's for the foreseeable future. So I'm super excited, and we have a lot of work to do, but I am an engineer. Please don't hold that against me. I left my wet blanket at home, I promise. But I really do. I have an open mind, and I want to build as much infrastructure as I can, while we have this funding source.
Wow, this made my job easy going last. I think, it's an interesting time because I think I want to start actually where you left off talking about funding. I mean, I don't know if y'all saw, and there was an article that was released a couple weeks ago, maybe, that basically the Trump administration is saying essentially that bike lanes are hostile to cars, that they impede their speed and they take up room on the street. Yes. Yeah, on purpose. Like, you name that's exactly the problem, right? And clearly they have a different perspective. Like, they see that as a problem. We see it as a solution to many other problems. And so I think that we're in an interesting time because even if you look at some of the grants, we have to be very judicious in the way that we present them, and which is challenging, I will say, especially for me. I mean, I have a little bit more of a leeway because I'm an elected official and people know where I stand, and I can say things that, some of my colleagues who are here on this panel can't always say, right? And we were at a place where we could name things the way that we wanted to name them. We could talk about the injustices to Black and brown communities. We can talk about reconciliation. We can talk about inequities in our communities. We could talk about poverty. We could talk about all the things, right? In a way, and how that related to safety, in a way that now they're essentially bullying us into not being able to talk about things like that. Having said that, what that means is that we just have to be creative about how we solve problems. And so I think LinkUS, what it provides us, and you named it, is an incredible funding source that can't be taken away. Why? Because we fund it. The people in this room fund it, right? Those TSI projects, though, just so we're clear, it's for the entire region. It's not just for Columbus, right? So it's every municipality in which COTA serves, because they too are investors in this project, right? So they too are expecting those bike trails or those connective trails. They're expecting those bike lanes, those roadway improvements, right? So it's just one part of the pie. But I think that it is also just a daunting task to reconstruct our streets, right? I mean, if you think about the pendulum, our roadways were made for like horse and buggies, right? And then we invented cars and we went all in on cars. We're like, everything's about a car. And then now we're like, whoa, let's back it up. Maybe everything isn't about a car now, because we already knew that everyone wasn't going to have the accessibility since cars were invented, that everyone was not going to have accessibility to that as a mode of transportation. That's why we invented public transportation, right? Is so that we could move people more effectively, more efficiently, more safely. Now, people didn't say it then because they really did it to line their own pockets, but whatever, we're the beneficiaries, right? We're rewriting that history for ourselves and we're smarter now. But it still takes lots of resourcing. It takes resourcing in order for us to do that. And so what folks will see sometimes in the Department of Public Service, and I know this because we have these conversations a lot of times, is we do look at a project and we think about all the other ways that we can leverage that project. So when it is street resurfacing, we're like, oh, we can also put in a bike lane. We can also do this. We can also do that. The reason we do that is not because we don't want to do that project. It's because we don't have the money, quite frankly, to do that project, right? And so when we're thinking about, when we have those dollars on the table, what are the other things that we can do to expand on that project and to add in other things? That is to the dissatisfaction of everyone's timeline, I will say that. But I also know that I look at, what our balance sheet is as a city. Putting in a sidewalk is incredibly expensive. Why? Because all of our utilities are underground. And so it's not just like, let's go pour concrete. It's like, now we got to do all this utility work. And a lot of times, similar to, how many of y'all own a house? owning a house is super fun. Not, right? Because you tear into this wall and all of a sudden, all the secrets of that 100-year-old house come out and they are not fun, right? And so it's the same thing for roadways, right? I mean, when we think about, I didn't know about things like vaults of utilities that are under our streets, right? Because we put everything underground. And so every time we tear something up, we have no idea what we might find. I mean, we saw that with the North Market, right? Our people before us didn't do the proper remediation. And so what ended up happening was a project that, you know, might have been a couple $1 million turns into several $1 million. Why? Because people before us didn't do the right thing, or we didn't realize that there were problems under the roadway. So I say all of that because that is the problem. I think what we're trying to figure out is solutions. I do think we need to get better about being open about what those solutions are. I think we need to be more transparent, be better storytellers so folks understand the challenges that we're up against, because I think sometimes, you know, I think that the department does get a bad rap for, well, you didn't want, it's not about will, it's about quite literally the resourcing. And so I will give it to them that I think that they have been trying, especially as of late, to figure out ways that we can be creative to make those dollars stretch and to meet the needs that we have. Again, it's not always on the timeline that we want. I mean, even sitting in this seat, people think that I don't have a Harry Potter wand, that I can make things happen the way that I want them to, when I want them to. It even for me, it doesn't happen in that way, right? Even the littlest things. And so I think that this is where advocacy comes, because it keeps a fire under our bellies to get things done, but there are real obstacles to meeting those challenges.
Thank you. Actually, that's a great segue into our next question, which is, this is a Mobility Justice Advocacy Summit. We're all here to learn what advocacy can do and what we all can do to help keep that fire under you and help push things forward and work with you, right, to push these things forward. So if you all could just give us some insight into how have you interfaced with advocates, and how has that changed the way that you see things and the way that you push for things?
I can go first. I actually really enjoy working with advocates. I appreciate their passion and to just care so much about something. I appreciate that, whether it's ADA or bike or, you know, whatever type of cause that you're moving after. I appreciate it and respect anybody that wants to take up the flag and go that route. What I would say, as far as some advice, is to always keep the conversations positive. I think as I've been in local government, you know, since I was out of college. It's been over 20 years. I worked in cities and now I'm with the county. But I think, you know, when you get the negative feedback, especially when you're trying to do things that maybe you're not hitting the mark completely, but you're making an effort and you're still getting that negative feedback, I think it turns a lot of jurisdictions and agencies off, because they're saying, okay, this person, we're never going to make them happy, so we're just going to stop listening to them. And we don't want that to happen. So I think the idea is you celebrate the small wins. Yes, it might not be perfect. It might not be exactly what you want, but give them some encouragement, tell them they're moving in the right direction, and continue to push what you're trying to do. I work with some really great advocates throughout my career: Trish Kovacs, David Roseman. You know, these folks, they understand that I get it and I'm trying as hard as I can. They understand that sometimes everybody in the agency that I work for doesn't share my passion and enthusiasm for pedestrians and bicyclists, and sometimes I'm up against, you know, my own group, and I'm trying as hard as I can, and we need to celebrate the small wins. So keep it positive. Celebrate those small wins and continue to push forward and get those champions within those organizations that'll fight for you. So,
Stevie, you and I even personally have been doing a lot of this, but I think there has to be layers to the advocacy role. I know Brian Estabrook has a great example of there can and has to be those loud people who are just screaming from the rooftops about what needs to be done. But if it's only people screaming from the rooftops, they're going to get turned off pretty quickly. There has to be layers to, okay, you have your people screaming, but also Stevie's going to text me with a question and I'm going to respond to them and be able to give them some insight about what the department thinks and maybe how Councilmember Barroso Padilla thinks about it and how we might be able to strategically think about it without just me calling Councilmember and screaming. So there has to be layers and try to be a little bit strategic at times. I know it doesn't always have to be that. I know at some point Stevie is going to come up and scream at me, and I will welcome that if I deserve it. And if I don't, I will scream back at you. Because that's what we have to do to, I think, get some of this hard work done. But productive screaming. Yeah, correct. Thank you. But I think there has to be kind of layers to what that advocacy can look like. And yeah, sometimes we need to be screamed at and pushed, but I don't want to be screamed at every day because that will turn me off and probably burn me out, and I don't want that for myself or my community either.
I think it's interesting. One thing I learned when I came onto council is a lot of times if you've watched city council meetings, in your spare time, sometimes we will have folks who come down and, they are protesting or they're upset with us or they've collected a group of folks who will come down. And I would say usually 9 times out of 10 times, 10 times out of 10, depending on the situation, like we've already had a pre-conversation, like we've sat down with the organizers of those groups. They've basically told us this is what we're gonna do, and we're like, okay. Because I think that we recognize that there are things that we can say, there are things that you can say, and we need both, right? It's not an either or proposition, it's an and proposition. And so to your point, I think that that's where it works together, right? Like there are things that we know. I think also it's important for folks to understand that, the administration side of the mayor's house, right? They actually do all of the work. We are legislators. So Brian does not actually work for me. They work for the mayor, right? So I could say, Brian, go do this. And if the mayor says, no, Brian, this is what you're gonna do, that's what Brian's gonna do.
Sorry, Lourdes.
Exactly, right? And I can continue now, that's where the advocacy comes in. That's where I can say, I am being a voice for the people and this is what the people want. And we are now at an impasse. And so now we need to start negotiating things. And I can negotiate on behalf of the people. But that's what I think is important for folks to understand, because I think what's also challenging, and this goes into the politics of it all, right, is that at any given time, I might have a union who is representing our workers who want me to push on the administration. I might have advocates from a community that have a development that's going in that I have to go push on the administration. I have advocates from the transit community that want me to go in and push on the administration. If I pull all of those cards at once, you know what people start to do? Not listen to me, right? I start to become ineffective. And so it is unfortunate that that is the game that we have to play, but I'm being as real with you as I can be. There are times where I have to push in different areas, and there are also times where I have to compromise. Like, hey, listen, I'm standing for the department, and that is the hill that I will fight for y'all on, but if I do that, then y'all need to show up for me over here, because we need to get this thing done. I mean, there have been times where I'm like, I've gone to the department and say, can we do this particular project? I'll find the funding for it. I mean, it's not like a sidewalk that I always find. Sometimes we can pull that lever, but it could be like a quick fix project or something else that we can do. We always try to find where's that happy medium with certain things, If you don't have the budget, then I will find the budget. So I think it is a continuous game that we have, and I hate to say the word game, but it is, right? It's like a balancing act of how do we find these compromises in different places. And I also think the other thing that I will also say is that the people who work at the city are your neighbors. The people who work at the city are your neighbors, right? And so these folks are hardworking. They're also taxpayers. They see some of the same things that you see. They have frustrations. Like, Rumpke doesn't have a list of everybody who works at the city and picks up their trash before they pick up yours, right? There are people at the city who call us like, I didn't get my trash picked up, right? It could be a director. I might not get my trash picked up. Like, nobody is giving out special favors because of whatever, right? And so I say that because I think about like our snow warriors who get yelled at all the time. They're working, y'all, during a snowstorm on Christmas. They leave their families to go plow our streets, right? they are working 24-hour shifts, like literally like cycling through. And so I think that sometimes we forget that there are people behind every job that we're talking about, right? And so on Christmas, when I brought them donuts, I was like, you're not with your kid today, and that sucks. You know what I mean? And like, there is the pushing that we can say we're not getting everything that we need, but there's also a human aspect that we need to remember in the work that we're doing. And I think that, you know, that's something that I carry with me all the time when I go to our department or when I go to some of our folks who work at the city who are working really hard and trying their best. And sometimes they're being directed by other people. And we just need to keep that in mind when in our advocacy, that there's still people behind all those jobs and there's still people behind that role. And there's a way to do it that we can all get the things that we want and need, but with like still seeing each other and respecting each other.
So I think with all that in mind, I want to ask a question around kind of coalition building here. And so, you know, we see that we have some strong advocacy for bikes and transit. There are some voices on the other side of the table who push back against that. Well, all of you are doing the work that you're doing. So what opportunities do you see that exist that maybe we're not seizing yet to build collaborations between government agencies, advocates, residents? How can we work with you to build more intentional sort of feedback loops and help get the information out there so that advocates can really see the impact of the advocacy that they're having and understand how it's helping shape the decisions and the projects that are getting built?
I think LinkUS has done a bunch to help shape what transportation options can look like for a community, that it doesn't need to be just more COTA lines, that there are other ways that we can provide opportunities for folks to get around. I also think there's probably some additional messaging that we can do that is not necessarily just from a bike advocacy group. I know what Yay Bikes deals with on a regular basis. Like, there is a pretty clear message about what Yay Bikes does and probably doesn't do. They have sort of a reputation. We need to be thinking about just how we can make safer streets in the city of Columbus. And I don't know that that message is always as crystal clear to the general population. If it's coming from Yay Bikes, they're like, well, that's just the bike group. I mean, I get it even within, tomorrow I'll probably hear about it because like people even within our office think I'm the bike guy. I'm like, well, I also just want to be able to get to work safe. And I want my neighbor and my son too as well. So I think some of it is just about how we message as a coalition, and whether that's a combination of Transit Columbus and Yay Bikes and Department of Public Service, or whether it's with a Columbus Aging Group, or it's with Public Health, or any of these other communities, or the Heart Association, about how we can just make our streets safer for all of our users and have that sort of overarching message, as opposed to just, I'm here to just talk about bikes and I don't care about anyone else. I know that's not what Brian Estabrook says in his newsletter, but I think that there is some of that from the general population when they see a Yay Bikes at an event or something, because we all showed up on bikes and we get sort of a reputation built on that.
I'm gonna say this quick. Your girls verbose. So I would say, and I say this to our area commissions, right? So our area commissions very often will come to us, especially when it's like budget season time, and they're like, "Hi, here's the 20 things we would like," and I'm like, "Which of them is the most important?" They're like, "Whichever one you choose." I'm like, "Nope, that's not correct. You need to tell me, right? Like, what is your top 3? What is your top 2? And I think as you think about today, and I know you're going to break off into groups and you're going to talk about maybe some strategy, whatever, that's one thing that I think would also be really helpful, is having a clear directive on like, how can we get 1 or 2 things done? And then how do we get those things done now? And what can we do? And because then we can tick down a list, right? If you give me 10 things, I know we can't do those 10 things. And even when it seems easy, I'm like, yes, it seems easy, but I know it's not going to be, right? But if you give me 3 things that you can say, we really want to work on these things, and I know that that's difficult because we have LinkUS, right? And there's probably some priorities around that. We have Bike Plus, or we have Vision Zero. We talked about a complete streets plan. We talked about all of this. But if we can really start to get strategic together to say, what's the 2 or 3 things we really want to achieve right? Or if you look at a bucket, like in this particular area or this particular area, I think having that sort of strategery together, that we, is that a word, strategery? Sure. But we can do that together. I think that'll help us. Then that gives me a place to really focus on. That gives us a win together, right? And I think that that gives us a clearer path of how we can get things done, instead of the like what feels sometimes like, oh, this thing is coming up, now we want this, or this thing is coming up and now we want this. So
I would say, at COTA, we have service change public meetings that occur every 3 times a year before January, May, and September. If you weren't aware, those are when the service changes occur. So we have public meetings preceding those. So that's a great time to offer public comment. Also, city council meeting, showing up to provide testimony there when appropriate. And then, we're always open to hearing ideas on how we can partner on pilot projects or hear ideas. I personally, in my role, happy to have a discussion one-on-one or with groups, just to hear like what your concerns are, how we can better partner together. And so, you can find me on LinkedIn, by the way. But just want to encourage people, the advocacy route is so important for us. Bring a neighbor, bring a friend, encourage them to learn more about what's going on, because there are so many opportunities, especially as we are in certain design phases with LinkUS and the corridors. There's also going to be additional corridors that will be named here in the future. A lot of service opportunities that for our existing lines to improve frequency, all of that good stuff. So it's happening all at once, and there's so much going on. But there's plenty of opportunity. And by the way, I should probably share that I did bring some copies of the progress report. It is on the registration table for any of you that are interested in the public meetings that are coming up are mentioned in this progress report, but this is just about 10 days old. Just what we're doing, being transparent about taking that public information, those public comments, and what we're doing with that information is so important for us to build trust as well. So please reach out to me and feel free to take one of these or visit the website that has this as well.
I will say I'm glad we mentioned area commissions, because I find area commissions to be very helpful in my role. Again, I mentioned I maintain a lot of the areas outside of city jurisdiction. When you look at the map of the areas that I maintain, it's just a smattering of jurisdiction, like all over the map. And I mean, I'll have a signal on one part of town and a little piece of roadway on another, part of the county. It's insane. So without a map, you really don't know like what my responsibility area is. So a lot of times what happens is people complain, but they're complaining to the wrong person. So I'm getting them after they've talked to 3 or 4 people and they're super upset. So I think what advocates can do is make sure that they understand what the jurisdiction is that can assist them, and use the area commissions to help push their cause. Area commissions have a pretty good link with us. We talk to them a lot. We go to their meetings a lot. And I've had a lot of the projects that I am championing now it came to me through an area commission or through a resident who finally got a hold of me and said, hey, this is a really big problem. And I'm like, okay, I didn't realize it was a problem. I'll start working on it, fixing it. I got funding, and now we're constructing it. So one of the big projects specifically that I'll mention is in addition to my role at the county, I'm also the chair for the Central Ohio Greenways Advisory Council. And so when I'm finishing my 4th term, but when I first started, I wanted to meet with all the communities to make sure they knew where the Central Ohio Greenways were in their community, and see if they needed help or needed any more information, or wanted guidance on how to make them, get to them to a point where they're funded and constructed. And I met with a group in Grove City, and what came out of that meeting was a section of my road on Brown Road that connects Frank up to Mound and Harrisburg Pike was being used by Grove City bicyclists to get downtown. And I didn't know that. That was completely news to me. So what I did was I started pushing that project, and after a few failed attempts, we did get federal funding, and now that project is scheduled to be constructed with a shared use path on one side, sidewalk on the other, and we're not even widening the road. We're actually narrowing the road and putting curb. So we're going to slow traffic down, and we're going to get peds and bikes off the road. So we're fixing that problem, but I would have never heard about that if I didn't go to that meeting in Grove City. So understand as an advocate who can fix your problem. I was mentioning the other day too, I was at an event at Brewdog in Canal Winchester, and I was talking to this couple that biked to the event all the way from Dayton, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And they said, yeah, the worst part of it was this last section on Groveport Road. And I'm like, oh, it's my road. And I'm like, okay, well, I can fix that. And now that's a LinkUS project, TSI funded, and it's going to get constructed in 29, where we're going to take a path in Canal Winchester and connect it to the Central Iowa Greenways regional system, so it gets bikes off that road, because, yeah, bikes should not be on that road. So, or at least the somewhat confident bicyclists like me are not comfortable on that road. So I'm providing that link, so now the entire city of Canal Winchester can get to the Central Iowa Greenways. Again, would have never known about that unless I wasn't talking to this random couple that tried to bike from Dayton. So you got to get to the right agency that can do something about it, and use your area commissions. They're a great resource.
I would also like to just add one thing to that as well. So it's funny because one thing I started to notice when we, and it's crazy because I've been in office now 4 years, and when I first came on, there was this project in Clintonville, and it was just interesting, the conversation that we were having with folks. It was on Indianola, and some of the business owners were upset because we're taking away parking, and even 4 years ago, folks were like, well, people don't bike here, and this is a chicken and the egg, and we're who cares about building it for the future? We should build it when then we have all these people. And I'm like, when are we going to have all these people if you don't make it safe for them? Anyways, what I started to realize was I was like, I'm like the perfect person to talk about cycling in the city, because first of all, it's not like your girl's in shape, okay? It's not like I am out there. I mean, I got an e-bike purposely, okay? Like, if I had to ride a regular bike from downtown to my house, I should start today and I'll get there tomorrow morning. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm just saying, right? So first of all, that's true. Second of all, I don't know all of the biking signals. I ride with one of my aides who does. Literally, we were turning the corner and she's like, you have to look. And I was like, I don't want to look. She's like, Lourdes, you have to look. You can't go without looking, but I'm like scared, right? I mean, I am probably the majority of the city. I'm probably the people who are like, oh, I would probably bike, but I don't know. Without the bike lanes on Broad Street, I've heard this a million times. Like, now people are using that because they feel safe, like they wouldn't have done it before, right? They're biking with their kids, they're biking with different groups, whatever, right? And so it started to dawn on me like, oh, I think what we've been doing is we've acted like this is like a niche group of people, right? Who are like, they have this idea in their head of who they are, when the vast majority of people actually bike in some way in their life, but we're not engaging them in a way that feels like, it's like NASCAR or nothing, right? So I think when there's more drivers than there are NASCAR drivers, but if you make it NASCAR, it's just gonna feel like that's not for me, right? And so anyways, I say that because as I think about people in Canal Winchester, as I think about people outside of the city, I moved from Marion Village, which felt like I was very much more in the core of the city, to back to the neighborhood that I grew up in, which is between Bexley and Whitehall. And it is a very different neighborhood, but people there are still cycling. You're still going to, to the rec center, to the pool, to someplace else on your bike. You have Bexley, you have Whitehall. There are cyclists there. I see them when I'm on my bike, right? And so how are we reaching those folks and having them also come in when we're talking about removing bike lanes, when we're talking, or parking, when we're talking about all the things we're talking about. And they do sit on those area commissions. They are outside of the city. I had some older adults, working with them, the community that I love so much, our older adults, that were like, we want connective trails because that's how we're staying fit. My first biking with residents, I've been doing these, was with a senior group. First of all, these people smoked me. Thank God I was on an e-bike because I would have still been on the Olentangy Trail today. One of these dudes biked from DC to Seattle. He's not a regular cyclist, right? And he was literally 70. So but I was biking with them and they're like, we go on these trails. They were sharing with me their experience of the connectivity of the trail, or that when they're in the park, people, when they're training for Pelotonia, they take over, so then they can't ride those trails, right? So all these things, these perspectives, that's not the group that would have come to mind when I first thought about advocates in the cycling community. So that's my other thing, is I think that we have to think about how are we reaching more people that probably are in line with the things that you all want, that folks who show up here today want, that aren't already being talked to or being engaged in a particular way.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Before we do that, I just want to say that if you're wondering how we're going to do all of this, we're going to cover that in our sessions later today. We have concrete and examples, and it's so great to start with this panel, because I think we can now point to examples and say, remember when. The last ask, and I think it's something that everyone in the room deals with. Robbie, you mentioned right from the beginning, like we're doing a lot of change and people don't like that. There's going to be pushback. There's pushback internally, there's pushback from business owners, there's pushback from residents, there's pushback from everybody. So my last question for you all, and we only have a couple of minutes to answer, is what are you all doing about the pushback, and what can we do to help with that?
Well, I will say, I think the biggest thing is to support the agencies, support the community that's trying to do the improvement, because you can't do anything without getting complaints. There is a segment of the population, I like to call them cave people, citizens against virtually everything, and they will complain. If you hand out 20s on the corner, they're going to want a 50, right? So those are the people that we need help with. And what happens is when they get to a council member, or if they get to somebody that you know can shut the project down, it makes it difficult for us that we got the funding, we're doing the construction, now one person doesn't want it in their front yard, and now we're talking about canceling the project. So it's that political fortitude that, like, okay, we have made the decision, we are moving forward. So supporting that agency and that this is the right thing to do. There's one person that doesn't want it, there's 1,000 people that are going to use it on a weekly basis. And just continue to push forward and let people know that, yeah, the cave people are like 1% of the public that is going to enjoy that facility. So it is very difficult when you deal with it every day, but just support the agency and try to push through. So
I think pushback is just only natural with change, so much change, and it's scary. From our standpoint, we have to just continue pushing on community engagement and education and informing what's coming, which is why we are now producing the progress reports for LinkUS to share everything related what's going on, so that we're building trust and transparency with the residents in our service area. So we have to continue that. It wasn't just about getting the levy passed, so thanks to our voters for November of 2024, including your advocacy, particularly from Transit Columbus. That's so huge, and so we are so appreciative. But we still have the huge opportunity to deliver clearly on what the voters wanted. And construction starts on West Broad Corridor, Bus Rapid Transit Corridor next year. Mike mentioned thanks. 8 projects that are starting January of next year. So along with that, we're going to have to continue engaging and informing the community, because they're going to start to see and feel that impact. So that's huge. We have not taken our foot off the pedal yet.
I would say, I think, so if you have not, if folks haven't caught on, this council has certainly started to push back on people. We've started to push back on when we see NIMBYism. We've started to push back when people don't want certain things because it's going to take away your parking, it's going to take away whatever. I mean, I've had very,
that was a wild day.
I've had very, very uncomfortable conversations, disrespectful conversations, quite frankly, about, something as little as parking or something like a bike lane or whatever. So we've done that work, but I will say what's challenging for me is that, if we have a a difficult zoning issue, almost on every zoning issue, transportation is a part of that, and people actually will lean back on transportation as a reason to not put in a development, which is interesting. But I think that people don't show up at council when things are like going good, because if things are going good, you're like, there's nothing here to see, right? But the challenge is when people are pissed, they will come in full force. And then there's like two people who are counteracting whatever they're saying, right? Even when we know that they might be not making a good decision, they're not on the right side of something, right? So then you just have like 9 council members that are representing people who they're like, we don't believe you. Because 200 of us showed up to say we didn't want this project, where's all the other people who do, right? Because that's not what people do. They're like, you just don't, you don't do that. You don't go to the doctor always when you're healthy unless you're showing up for a checkup, right? You show up when there's a problem. And I think that's how people see city council, is they show up when there's a problem. And so I think that just keeping your eye to the street or your ear to the streets when you're seeing things that are happening, that you can then show up to counteract the folks who are against something when you are for something, when you can very easily see it, because that gives us cover. Because if not, it does feel like it's just us and them. And then all these articles come out, like city council wants this, like, I don't know, somebody's driving my like campaign funds because I did a thing that you didn't want me to do, or I'm representing people that they're not seeing that particular day, right? But this is where I'm not trying to pit neighbor against neighbor, but I am saying when we think about advocacy, we need to think about it on all levels. And when are we showing up in these places where it may not always be obvious, right? Everything that we do, there's a transit element to it. So not just showing up when there's an obvious transit element, but showing up in those other times where you can then advocate for transit in these other places, I think would also be key.
I'm trying to bring engagement earlier on in the process. I think the hardest part that people feel about change is when all of a sudden there's a backhoe in their front yard, and that's when they're really pissed because they didn't know anything about it, and now their parking's gone and there's construction happening outside their house at 6 a.m. So trying to have engagement earlier on in a process so that we can get feedback from them, and even though we might not love the feedback that we get, at least there's the start of a dialogue a year ahead of a project that we can try and work through, and how we can maybe mitigate some of their concerns or issues in that first year before construction actually starts, as opposed to just showing up with construction equipment and saying, well, Mike told me we were just going to go ahead and do this, so we're going to do it. I'm not saying you do that, but I think we as Department of Public Service have started to and have a lot more progress to make in terms of how what decision points we make and when, and how we can get involvement or engagement earlier on in a process. So.
Yep. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for our panelists here.